My name's Alex Lindell, and my current title is Senior Director of Product Management. I've been with Lineagen for close to 10 years, worked with Dr. Paul that entire time. I was introduced to him through the University Venture Fund, which is a student-managed venture fund that was spun out of the University of Utah, the first of its kind. Dr. Paul came to us for some financial analysis when Lineagen first got the assets from the state of Utah and from the University of Utah to try and figure out how best to commercialize those assets. So I led that project because I had a background in genetics and a business degree. After I did that project, I came on as an intern in between my first and second years of the MBA program, and then I stayed on full-time ever since then. I think that was in 2003. I think the great thing about Lineagen is the decades of research that we were able to build this company upon. The Utah Population Database, the people at the state of Utah, at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, Steve Prescott, Mike Levitt, John Huntsman, all of the politicians and the leadership at the University of Utah that made that technology available, that built that technology, and then gave us access to the technology to be able to do this type of research. So we really are able to build upon decades and decades of research. It was, a lot of that work was used in the Human Genome Project. All those Caucasian families came from Utah. Mark Leppert, one of our scientific co-founders, he was the one that really, generated all those Caucasian reference families for the Human Genome Project and then for the follow-on HapMap project. So again, we got to just build on all of that work that was done before that. And then since then, we've been able to build a really exceptional team because we have access to what is probably the best genetic resource in the world, is the Utah Population Database. So being able to access that, being able to access those thought leaders, Steve, who's the chairman of our board, Mark Leppert, who's the chief science advisor, and having access to those types of minds has really made a big difference for us. I think the relationship between Dr. Paul and myself is, I think, is very complementary. I think we have a lot of skill sets that play off one another really effectively. So he has vision, and he's able to kind of harness the high-level vision of these scientific luminaries, and Dr. Prescott and Dr. Leppert, and then I'm the detail guy, and I put it pen to paper and kind of make the business model and develop the tactical strategy and the plan. The thing that interested me initially was just the genetics, the puzzle, being able to, the problem, the mass of 3 billion bases, and the ability to use that information to kind of decode these instructions of the human body. The ability to be able to do that was something that was really exciting to me, and I realized pretty quickly that the Utah Population Database was a really unique resource that you really weren't going to be able to access anywhere else in the world. I mean, this combination of these huge families in the Mormon population. I mean, 10 kids who each have 10 kids who each have 10 kids, and all of a sudden in just a few generations you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and then they're exceptionally participatory. So our participation rates for genetic studies in Utah is like 90%, compared to Duke, where I think the researcher told me they're lucky to get 50%. And then having all of that information, the genealogy, the best genealogy in the world. You can go to countries in Asia and find really huge families, but you have no idea how people are related to one another, and being able to kind of trace lineage in those, I said it again.
Take it from, and being able to trace.
And being able,
and look at Diane.
And being able to trace lineage in those big families in other countries is really impossible without that data source that's the Utah Population Database. So I recognized that pretty quickly when I started the project. But I think as we've developed the business model, we've started to offer it clinically, and you can see how patients use this information and how they change the way that the doctors are treating medicine. We're dealing with doctors that before we came along, they were afraid when they saw a kid with autism coming down the hallway. This is going to take forever. I'm going to have to give the parents bad news. I'm not going to be able to do anything for them. And now they're in a position where I think when they see those kids coming down the hall, they feel confident about their ability to be able to help that child, their ability to be able to tell the parents what they need to be able to tell the parents, and do it with confidence and do it in a way that they don't feel like they're doing a disservice to the patient by even opening their mouth. So I think, as we've built the company and as we've got out there clinically, you really get to see the utility of this in clinical practice, and that has been exceptionally exciting for me. Although I still get to play with the science at a pretty deep level when I want to. The generic name is microarray. So gene chip is a registered trademark of a type of microarray. And there's a bunch of different microarray technology that's available. The Affymetrix array that we use is Affymetrix is the pioneer in microarray technology. And the chip that we use from them today is the highest resolution chromosomal microarray available for the type of testing that we do. And we have partnered with them to design a custom microarray. And I'll explain exactly what that means in more detail in the slides. So the technology we use is called microarray technology, or chromosomal microarray technology. The acronym for that is CMA. The registered trademark of the brand that we use is the gene chip. It's manufactured by a company called Affymetrix. We've partnered with them to develop a custom version of this microarray that has the highest diagnostic yield, or the highest resolution for what we're doing. If you think about it in terms of digital cameras, we're using the highest resolution digital camera that's possibly available. So there's a lot of point and shoot and disposable cameras that are out there, but what we're using is the best digital camera that you could buy, and that's what this chip represents. The technology that goes into this chip is probably the coolest technology ever developed. It's unbelievable if you think about what they've been able to do. So to make this technology work, they had to create silicon chips, just like the computer chips in your computers. And then what they've done is they've learned how to synthetically create human DNA in the sequence that they want that DNA in. And then they learned how to adhere that DNA to that silicon chip. And that's just what's in this piece. Then you have to have the analysis technology and the software to be able to analyze and evaluate what the chip is telling you. So the amount of science that went into this, the silicon work from computer scientists, the synthetic biology from biologists, and then the adhesion chemistry to get it to attach. It's years and years of technology that's gone into this, and Affymetrix is really the pioneer in developing that technology. So that's why we're excited to partner with them to build this custom array that we're using. So the slides that I prepared kind of talk about this, what happens in this chip at a more micro level. So in the first slide, what you see is it's an array. It's a bunch of small features. And within each one of those features are millions and millions of single-stranded DNA. So if you think of what DNA is in the human body, each human has DNA, which is the instructions for what we look like and how we behave, and all the different traits that make people different from people and people different from animals. In that DNA, each person has 3 billion single nucleotide bases. Those are the building blocks of DNA. And what we're testing with this array is looking at one of those DNA nucleotides every 1,000 or so across the entire genome. So we're looking at about 3 million total DNA nucleotides with this technology, and that represents a really high resolution image into what you're looking for in the DNA. To give you a reference, for forensic testing, they only look at 13 DNA markers. And that's all that's really needed to be able to tell one human apart from another. So we're looking at 3 million. It's a very high resolution analysis, and what we're looking for are big chunks of DNA that are missing or are duplicated. So for whatever reason, the machinery that created the DNA made a mistake and it duplicated it or just got rid of big chunks of DNA. When I say big chunks of DNA, we're looking at things maybe on the order of tens of thousands of bases to millions of bases that are missing. Down syndrome, for instance, is a whole chromosome that's been added in there, and that's what causes Down syndrome, is an extra chromosome of a few million bases that have been added to a person with Down syndrome. So we're looking for things that are smaller and in some cases even bigger than that. So the way that you do that is you create this synthetic DNA and you put that on a chip that's shown in this slide. So what Affymetrix does is they create these single-stranded pieces of DNA called DNA probes, and then they attach those to the silicon substrate. And they put those on the array, again, millions and millions and millions of these DNA strands in known sequence, and they put those in known locations on the array. So what they have is an array that has features that measure these 3 million different locations across the human DNA. And they know exactly where it is on the microarray. So the software can, when the software goes to do the analysis, it knows exactly what's supposed to be there and what they're looking for. So they take that, and then what they do is they put human DNA, the human DNA sample from our patient, on top of those single-stranded DNA. And each one of those human DNA fragments has a little fluorescent tag on it. And so if it binds to the single-stranded DNA probe on the array, then it'll light up. And since you have millions of DNA strands for each one of the markers that you're looking at, what the technology actually does is it measures the intensity of those fluorescent tags within that feature, which is looking for just that one location. So, sorry, I skipped ahead to slide 2. I think it'll be pretty obvious when you look at the slides, yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to go then to slide 4, because I think I kind of that explanation takes you through slide 1, 2, and 3. So in this slide, what we're showing is the raw output, and the raw output just looks like a bunch of different colored dots, and it's not something that you could read by eye. So the other piece of this technology, which is phenomenal, is the laser technology that's used to measure the fluorescence and how intense the fluorescence is that's coming off the array, and then the software that analyzes exactly what that means. So if it's very bright, that means it bound 100% and that DNA exists and it's there as you would expect. If it's lower intensity, that might indicate that it's partially bound, but not like what you would expect. So maybe there's not enough DNA, or the DNA is just slightly off. And the output that we get then off the software tells us, here's the places where there's DNA missing and where there's DNA added in these big chunks. And that is being compared to DNA from thousands and thousands of people that have been used to build that reference set. So what we get is an output of every big chunk of DNA that's either missing or duplicated. And then what we do is we investigate very thoroughly exactly what that means. Is it hitting a gene? Has that gene been implicated in autism, developmental delay, another type of neurological function? Is it a gene that's been discovered but that we don't really know what its function is? And then we scour the literature to find out, what does this mean? Is this what could be causing the patient's symptoms? And that takes an awful long time to do that work. And we take great care. Our genetic counselors and our cytogeneticists spend an awful lot of time looking at every single one of these changes that we see in each person to try and determine if that's what's causing their disorder. And if we determine that it is what's causing the disorder, in many cases we're changing the way that these patients are treated. And we have a lot of kids with a diagnosis of autism because that's how they present clinically to the physician. But in reality, what they have is a well-known genetic syndrome that just has a bunch of overlapping symptoms. If you think about what's going on here, there's 700 disorders of childhood development that have a genetic basis. But we're talking roughly 30, 40 symptoms that they all share. So there's a huge imbalance there between the number of disorders and the number of symptoms. So if you're a doctor trying to make a differential diagnosis and use a rule out type of a methodology, you'll never get there with using symptoms alone. You just won't get the diagnosis right. And it happens time and time again. And so you end up with these kids that have these kind of placeholder diagnoses, right? Developmental delay. I mean, that's not really a disorder. You're just describing the symptoms that a kid's not meeting their developmental milestones. So a genetic diagnosis is an objective assessment of what's really going on and what's happening with the underlying biology. It moves you from, as a clinician, from treating symptoms to treating the underlying biology, what's actually happening at the patient's level. We have one example of a kid who had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. He had been in intensive speech and language therapy. His parents described temper tantrums because he couldn't communicate with them what he wanted. So he would just kind of, throw a tantrum and scream and yell multiple times a day. And then when he got the diagnosis, what he really had was Angelman syndrome, which is a dramatically different disorder than autism spectrum. And one thing that's a hallmark of Angelman is that these kids, they just don't develop speech and language at more than 10 or 15 words in a lifetime. And so what they did is they took him out of speech and language therapy, put him in alternative communication therapies, using pictures to communicate, using sign language, and he's excelling in those types of therapies. And he had been languishing in that speech and language therapy for a couple years. And he went from being able to have almost no communication with his parents that was very effective in either direction, to being able to communicate with them on a regular basis, almost everything that he needed. Instead of having to scream and yell if he wanted a glass of milk, he could just go and grab the picture of a glass of milk and hand it to his parents, and there was no tension there. And so he went from having a few outbursts a day to having maybe one or two a week. And so if you can imagine how serious of a change that is for these families. That's just one example, and we've tested over 1,000 kids now. So what we're doing to help these kids and to help their families and to change the way that their doctors practice medicine, the way these kids are treated, the way these kids are treated at home and at school and in life, and I think really preparing their parents to help them throughout their lifetime. Whereas until you have a diagnosis where you're really confident in that diagnosis, it's really hard to plan for the future. And what can you even expect, right? I mean, I think that in that case that I presented, they had the improper expectations. They thought that their son was going to be able to talk and communicate in sentences and paragraphs, and that just wasn't the case. And so it reset their expectations of what they can plan for in the future. I think that's called anticipatory guidance. Really, what can I anticipate? Are they going to meet these cognitive milestones? Are they going to go to college? Are they going to be able to live on their own? Are they going to be able to have a job? Do I need to set up a living trust for them? And all these types of questions that they come in a flood when you get this initial diagnosis. And a lot of parents are making those types of decisions about the long-term future for their kids, and it's based upon a wrong diagnosis, because it's really not possible to make this diagnosis unless you have some objective measurement. And genetics is the best tool we have to do that today. So I think what sets Lineagen apart from other companies that do genetic testing for kids with autism and developmental delay, and there's plenty out there, is that we are driving the biological understanding of autism and developmental delay. What these other companies are done, they either laboratories or they're technology companies. So they've invested in a laboratory, and what they're interested in is best utilizing that laboratory. Or a technology company that's made a type of microarray like this, that's looking to use that microarray in as many places as they can. So they use it for autism, they use it for cancer, and they're really experts in the technology, but not necessarily experts in the disorder. And if you're a laboratory, you're an expert at running a laboratory, you're not necessarily an expert at the disease. We don't have a laboratory, we don't develop the technology ourselves. What we do is we partner with the best laboratories and the best technology manufacturers. So we can always stay at the very leading edge of the technology and of the laboratory science. Where we put our proprietary investment is understanding the disorder, understanding the genetics of the disease, understanding that underlying biology, so that when we get the results from the technology and out of the lab, we are the best company to know exactly what you should do with that, what it means. The proprietary array that we're launching, the second generation of First Step DX, represents almost a doubling increase in the diagnostic yield of any other laboratory test that's out there for autism and developmental delay. So right now the diagnostic yield is 15 to 20%, and that's about where our competitors will remain And with this proprietary technology that we'll launch, the custom array that we developed in partnership with Affymetrix, will boost that diagnostic yield to close to 40%. And that means we'll double the number of kids that we can provide that objective diagnosis to. And I think there's just no way to compete with that. I think since we are doing the research, since we're driving that diagnostic yield, we can immediately make it clinically available, whereas our competitors have to wait for us to publish those results and wait for the patents to run out before they can even think about being able to use that technology and being able to run those tests. So what makes Lineagen special is that we do research, and we do research focused on autism and developmental delay, and then we partner with the technology and the laboratory companies that are the best in class. What we think is happening in autism is this. Have you heard of the triune brain theory?
No.
So you have three parts of your brain. You have the middle brain, the reptilian brain that controls your fight or flight response, and then you have the middle brain, which is your mammalian brain. It's your emotional brain, your emotional reaction to situations, and then you have the outer brain, which is your human brain, the thinking brain. That does deductive reasoning and language, things that other animals don't have. And what they believe is, if you think about social interaction in a human context, it's probably the most challenging things we have to do as humans. You have to engage all three parts of those brains simultaneously. So when you meet somebody new, you have to decide, is this friend or foe, fight or flight? And then you have to have an emotional reaction at some level to that person, no matter what the situation is. And then you have to think. You have to have a conversation. You have to have language, and you need to have all those things working together. And what they found in kids with autism is, while they have as many neurons as other humans, they don't seem to build these long connections between the neurons and the different parts of their brain. You think about the stereotypical behavior. It's almost like they're stuck in one part of their brain. And so up until the age of 6, you have what's called this intense period of neuroplasticity, where your brain is developing at a really rapid rate biologically. Neurons are building these connections out from their central location to other parts of the brain. You're seeing pretty major chemical changes in the brain. I think so what happens with applied behavioral analysis, which is the most commonly used treatment for autism, is it's really intensive one-on-one therapy with a therapist. And what the therapist is trying to get you to do is engage those different parts of your brain simultaneously. And if you can start that therapy during that period of neuroplasticity, before they're 4 years old, and you do it intensively for 2 or 3 years, you can actually force those connections to happen, because their brain's still developing. So you're almost training the brain and forcing them. So what we've seen is 10 to 25% of kids actually are off the spectrum after 3 or 4 years of treatment. So what we need to be able to do is diagnose those kids earlier. That's still the average age of diagnosis is 5 years old. That hasn't changed for 20 years. So all this awareness and everything we've done, ultimately we've made no real change in terms of the age of diagnosis. And I think it's because it's a really hard thing to diagnose. So that's why applying genetics to that diagnosis is really critical. But you have to do it early. You got to do it before they're 4 years old. And that means it's going to have to be done by pediatricians who frankly just don't have the genetics training to be able to offer it. So that's where Lineagen comes into play. We have genetic counselors, we have pediatric geneticists, we understand the technology with molecular scientists and partnerships with companies like Affymetrix. So we can bring that technology to bear on those frontline pediatricians that are the ones that really are going to be responsible for changing this whole diagnostic paradigm, getting these kids diagnosed early, getting them to treatment as quickly as possible, and then providing them with a medical home as they go through that treatment, so that we can get more and more kids off of that spectrum. Because I think what we can learn from kids with autism, I've met a few kids with autism that were autistic and didn't have communication ability, but then they went through this treatment and now they're able to communicate. The way their brains work are so different than the way that my brain works, that when you meet somebody that has that different type of brain functionality and can explain what they're thinking and their thought process, I think what we can learn from them in understanding human intellect and thought processing is going to be It's going to change the way that other humans function, and that other humans think about their health and their cognition and personality and social interaction and behavior. And so getting these kids to a point where they can be able to explain that when they're adults is really going to change life for everybody.
Okay, my name is Bert DeMille. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at Lineagen. Medical diagnostic space, it's a broad term and we're often confused with pharmaceutical, but it's a little bit different. These tend to be research tools that have moved into the clinic, and by that I mean things like DNA-based testing, PCR-based testing. Those terms may be familiar to some of you. Those are medical technologies that now have clinical implications. So basically those types of tests are used to help diagnose and treat disease at a broad level. My role previous to Lineagen, I was the commercial officer running sales, marketing in the commercial piece for Genoptix Medical Laboratories. There we were very successful at building an oncology diagnostics franchise that was really targeted towards the community oncologist. And there we felt there was a lack of understanding in helping to diagnose leukemia and lymphoma, which are very challenging from the cancer standpoint to try and diagnose. So our business model was to make it simple and easy for the community oncologist to make the right treatment decision for their cancer patients.
How did that translate into marketing success?
We were very successful there. What we were able to do is, I think, penetrate an unmet need in the market. And by doing that, we were able to grow the business from about $4 million per year up to about $180 million a year in 5 years. And it sounds simple, but it's not. It was really about execution in that market space, understanding the needs of those community oncologists and giving them what they wanted when they wanted it. LabCorp, Quest, the classic competitors at the time were really not geared with their services towards that community oncologist. I think there was a lot of similarities with that Genoptix business model with Lineagen. For instance, one of the things that I think is similar is the unmet need. You heard me mention that a little bit earlier. Community pediatricians typically today in the United States do not have the tools to make a proper evaluation for kids with developmental delay and autism. Just like cancer, just like leukemia, it can be difficult, it can be challenging. My role at Lineagen is to help to develop products and services to meet the needs of those pediatricians so that they can make a definitive diagnosis as early as possible with children with developmental delay and autism. As we know from the literature, early diagnosis is critical to successful treatment of these conditions. And that, I think, is the similarity. These guys need help, and we're there to give it to them. Right, those are great questions. I think understanding how it's working, I think you need to understand the call point. And by that I mean the pediatrician that we're calling on. What are their daily problems? What are their issues and needs? And on our sales team, I like to talk a lot about needs-based selling or problem-based selling. What's keeping these guys up at night? What things are challenging for them, difficult for them? We really try and gear our business model at Lineagen around the needs of the community pediatrician and giving them the tools, as I mentioned earlier, to diagnose. As far as getting larger and scaling that is something that takes a lot of attention to detail. And what I'm a huge fan of are metrics. Very little happens here at Lineagen without measuring the success of performance. To give you an example, how many cases came in today? How many bills got paid today? We watch that with very, very close efficiency across the organization to make sure that as we grow, we're growing at the right pace and we're measuring the right things. So I had the pleasure of spending about a year in a General Electric culture where if you didn't measure it, it didn't happen. So that's something that we've instilled here at Lineagen. We really watch our sales metrics very, very closely to make sure we're meeting our milestones, and we do it daily. Well, I think what was interesting about Lineagen is when I met the people, when I met the staff, the senior management team, there is a passion and a commitment, and a lot of companies talk about passion and commitment. Gee, we all want to do this, and we really, really are committed by it. There's a deep passion here to help not only the pediatricians, but the parents of children affected with autism and developmental delay. At Lineagen, we have a parent advisory board, which is a group of 12 parents that really help us understand not only what it's like to be in the shoes of a pediatrician, trying to see 25, 30 kids a day and keep up with that pace and catch developmental delay, but also the needs of the parents. And a lot of our offering here at Lineagen is very unique because it is geared towards not only helping the pediatrician, but helping the parents navigate through resources and understanding genetic testing and the value it can have in the management of their kids, to get that diagnosis early and to get intervention as early as we can. So I think the parent piece and the passion around that was really important during the interview process and really intrigued me and drew me to the organization. And I think something we're really good at Lineagen is remembering, and we'll do this at team meetings, there's a parent, there's a person behind every test result. It's not just a test result. There are people that are crying out for support and help. We have some very emotional discussions with parents here at Lineagen. Not only the genetic counselors, our financial counselors. We have a very liberal and supportive billing policy for the parents, for instance, to help them with their copays and deductibles, to really set in stone for them what maximum out-of-pocket liability is going to be. There's an appreciation for that because unfortunately many other vendors through their odyssey are not quite as supportive. So that's something we take great pride in. It's interesting you should bring up the foundation. We have a very close relationship, as close as we can, I think, with the Autism Society and Autism Speaks. We're very active in walks in the community for Autism Speaks. The Autism Society is another organization, as I mentioned, that we're very active with. Those are nonprofits, so keeping an arm's length relationship is important to them, but I can tell you there's a great degree of appreciation in both of those organizations for what we've been able to bring to the parents. Our support for the walks has been very well received by the regional directors across the country from Autism Speaks, so we're proud of that. How do we advertise? We currently don't have any direct-to-consumer marketing other than the web. The web does give us a unique opportunity through Opening Autism, which is a unique website that helps parents navigate through some of the challenges of diagnosing their child with delay or autism. And we also have another website called MChat. MChat is a diagnostic screening tool that we provide for parents free of charge to help them look for early signs and symptoms of developmental delay. So currently, at the size of our organization, no broad-based marketing, but I think that awareness gives us an opportunity to take it when we're ready. I'll give you an example. We did do a lead story in a Florida TV station, an NBC affiliate. We've had 2 now that have run about First Step DX by a local pediatrician, Dr. Annette McCool. That just happened kind of spontaneously. So the level of interest is really, really strong to the point where pediatricians that are in our court are willing to speak publicly and through the media about what we're doing. We think down the road we have some unique opportunities with the national media to talk about what we do, and that's on our list for it to do down the road. Looking at what we've been able to do to tie an actual result with a change in clinical management, we did actually have a parent with what ended up being Angelman syndrome. Angelman syndrome is a developmental delay condition that is what is considered pathonomic, meaning if we find it genetically, that is a hallmark marker for Angelman syndrome. This child had been in an intervention program for autism, for general autism, and it was not working. It was not effective. The results came back for Angelman. It was not garden variety. It was garden variety autism. It was Angelman syndrome. The clinical management of that condition is very different than it would be for autism. In this case, speech was an issue. So the inability to speak effectively, there's a loss of verbal fluency there for that child. So once we knew it was Angelman, once the parents knew and the pediatrician knew, they were put into a signing program to be able to sign and to use picture cards for communication. The level of frustration in that household went down significantly. The therapy was changed, knowing what the specific delay condition was. The challenge with autism is it tends to be bucketized, right? It tends to be, well, delay is delay, put them all in a program. Where the microarray can help is it can steer care specifically around a subset of developmental delay that may look like and feel like and smell like autism. It's not autism. It's something entirely different. So we have numerous cases now in our case files. We have over 900 cases in the door where we can pull up examples that we share with pediatricians to show, doctor, it wasn't what you thought. This was another condition. And the change in clinical management was significantly different with that finding that it would have been otherwise. And that's what makes you feel good, is you're seeing an actual change in clinical management for the child for the better. Typically, it's an innovative pediatrician who is perhaps a little younger, a little more innovative, fresh out of school. They read the literature, they're up to date with what's going on. They've heard of chromosomal microarray, they've heard of genetic testing. But up until Lineagen, there's been some barriers for them. The inability to manage insurance. Insurance can be a real burden for a physician's office. In some offices, there are 2 or 3 staff who deal with nothing but insurance claims and issues. We take on that responsibility at Lineagen. So that's step 1, dealing with the insurance. Step 2 is they'll ask me, Bert, will you talk to the parents? I'm not a genetic counselor. I'm not comfortable with this information. Do you offer the counseling? Absolutely, we do. So that was a critical part of the success, the counseling and then the interpretation of the results, the handling of the insurance. I think when you add that package together, it makes pediatricians much more comfortable in ordering a test than they normally would be. I think that's been the winning formula for us. I do get questions occasionally from interested parties, investors, about what it is that makes Lineagen special, and I really think it's our focus. One of the things that's the secret sauce, if you will, about Lineagen is the focus on developmental delay and autism. When you look at the competitive landscape out there, you look at LabCorp and Quest and Signature, all of these companies are what I call technology-based companies. They base their solutions on a chip that does everything. It does cancer. It tries to do developmental delay. It's a broad-based indication for disease, human disease. Really, they don't specialize in the condition. What we do at Lineagen is we specialize in developmental delay, autism only. We believe these are unique challenges not only for the pediatrician and for the parents. So rather than be a general tools provider, we focus on the disorder specifically. And currently, we're the only provider out there doing that today. I think that makes us special. Why not screen everybody? And in the diagnostic vernacular, that would be considered a general screen, where you'd be screening, as you said, every child coming in the door. Current guidelines and current medical practice does not cover general screening for genetic testing for developmental delay. It's very clear, actually. The American College of Medical Genetics, as well as some AAP papers that have been published, recommend using genetic testing, whole genome microarray, CMA, which is what we use, chromosomal microarray, in first step, to evaluate kids who are at risk for developmental delay. They've shown clinical signs and symptoms, loss of verbal fluency. It's interesting, autism can be, the reason you check at 18 and 24 months for a particular child is that verbal fluency can begin at 16 to 18 months and then rapidly vanish. That actually can be a hallmark of certain types of autism. So that's the reason for that 18 and that 24-month screen. So current guidelines for reimbursement within the medical community are for children that are seen to be at risk and failing their milestones. The insurance companies have been very supportive up to this point in reimbursement. We've actually been quite successful with the help of Autism Speaks, who's been a strong advocate in 30 states now. Testing in some states like Arizona is particularly called out that genetic testing evaluation should be covered by insurance companies. So certain laws actually call out genetic testing for kids at risk for delay. 30 states now call out specifically applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, to treat children diagnosed with an autistic condition. So Autism Speaks has been very supportive in getting state legislatures and insurance companies behind managing these kids and treating these kids. Currently, though, in that delay in autism bucket only. The results for the test for first step. When first step is run, our current diagnostic yield, if you will, is the term that's used in the industry, is about 18%, meaning we will have a genetic anomaly in roughly 18% of the kids that are sent to us for evaluation, okay? The interesting thing about this is that's today. That's generation 1. Generation 2, which we're due to launch in Q2 of this year, will take that diagnostic yield from 18 to almost 38%. And what that will do is it'll introduce a number of genetic markers on over 140 new novel genes that have been evaluated through the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the University of Utah. We'll be able to increase the yield of those findings up to about 38%. So that's nearly 4 in 10 kids at risk for delay or on the spectrum, we will be able to find a genetic association. That will be roughly double of any competitive chip on the market today. So that's going to open up, we think, additional markets for the company in academic centers, in institutions, in hospitals, who really want the best of the best with this chip. So they'll have their choice of looking at just the chip or the chip with integrated services. Again, I think it's going to open up some new opportunities for us to have that chip in our pocket.
My name is Michael Paul. I'm the CEO of Lineagen. I'm also the president of the company, as well as a director of the organization on the board of directors, and one of the founders of Lineagen, which dates back to about 2002 through an initiative with the state of Utah to commercialize Utah's core strengths in human genetic research. So part of my role in the company is obviously managing the organization, but mainly an externally focused function, working closely with our Chief Operating Officer, Galen Moffat, who manages much of the internal issues. I deal much with the board of directors, with investors, with the external communities, including patients, including families, doctors, our customers, and our investors, who are also directors of the organization. Lineagen is an organization whose mission it is to enhance and to accelerate the diagnostic evaluation of complex disorders. And we start with autism first, because we believe truly that there's a better way to diagnose autism and developmental delay. And in many disease conditions, you need a drug to change a person's life. And with autism and developmental delay, you don't need a drug. You just need a better way to have kids evaluated by physicians with the best tools and the best services that the medical organization has to offer. I think with any successful startup company, you need to have passion. And passion is important because startup companies are difficult, they're time consuming. But I think the unique aspect of Lineagen is, in addition to passion, we all have a collective mission, and that's the purpose of the organization. And the purpose of the organization that we truly believe from the top to the bottom is to do good first, and to do good for others, and by doing good for others, we'll do well for our shareholders. We're a very values-based organization. Certain of our values include integrity, and we're not going to sacrifice our integrity as an organization for the sake of expediency. We also understand that every customer we serve is an individual. They are experiencing unique situations in their families that other people don't experience, and we want our services to treat the person as an individual. And we also want those services to have a sound scientific basis, that we believe that all of our services have a sound scientific basis, and that we have a sense of urgency here at Lineagen to provide those services as soon as is practicable. We want to bring the best in medical treatment to patients who currently don't have access to those services, as well as providing better services to those kids who are currently being offered a genetic test. Really, the inception for Lineagen for me really started back in the late 1980s. And although that seems like a long time ago, really the seed of wanting to start a scientifically based business, which I believe is very important in society. Working in Boston in the late 1980s, you saw the advent of the biotechnology industry with the company spinning out of Harvard, spinning out of MIT, and realizing that you need a scientific education. Went on to get a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry, all with the intent of earning my credentials to start a scientific-based business. And with Lineagen's founder, Steve Prescott, who was an academic researcher and chairman of the, executive director of the Huntsman Cancer Institute at the University of Utah, along with Mark Leppert, who was a co-chair of human genetics at the University of Utah, really came together to identify a unique opportunity to identify novel genetic factors that could play a role in a more comprehensive diagnostic evaluation of kids with autism. And really, when you think about that mission and you think about children, and we all have experiences in our lives to lead us to one direction or another, I think we're all very compassionate individuals, and we care about children, we care about families, and we care about the desperate situation that really can be affected. I think one of Lineagen's mission is to really change the world in the sense of changing for the better how children with autism and developmental delay are diagnosed, because clinical research has shown that kids can be treated effectively as young as 18 months, and yet the current diagnosis for autism is 5.5 to 6 years old. I mean, that's a tragedy. To realize that there is unrecoverable time that's lost, that could be used, by a child, let me rephrase that, could be used to treat a child, to provide them and their families with a better way of life, and has a direct impact on society in terms of reducing the cost that autism and related developmental delay conditions cost society because of the services that are required. And so the earlier the diagnosis, the better the outcomes, the better it is for society, but most importantly, the better it is for that child and the better it is for that family. And again, I think with a group of compassionate individuals with a collective purpose, we can change that for the better.
Why autism?
I think that's a good question. I think autism today is a little bit like cancer used to be, in the sense that we say everybody knew somebody with autism or with cancer. I remember when my daughter was about 18 months old and about 3 years old actually, and
Say that again, so good, yeah.
I remember when my daughter was 3 years old and a neighbor came to visit, and they had a child the same age. And their son, it was a boy, and their son would not play with my daughter, but would focus on very repetitive behaviors. And so it struck me at that time, and you saw the desperation in the mom and the dad of they did not know what was going on with their child. And you realize that, I mean, this is just one of many families that struggle with this type of condition. And when you don't have that experience in your family, you feel like you can reach out and help other people. And even though we haven't walked in the shoes of a parent with a child with autism, I believe that gives us the opportunity to really understand through the use of a parent advisory board here at Lineagen, to try to understand how we can make our services better and reach out and to help those families. So I think the passion around autism was just really seeing children affected with autism at the same ages of our children who were not affected, and just seeing the real desperate situation that those kids needed help. And I think two things came into play, really. I mean, if you look at Einstein's quote of chance favors a prepared mind, I think that preparation is important to put yourself in a position to take advantage of opportunities. And here in Utah, we have a great opportunity to bring world-leading genetic research to bear on very clinically important and in certain cases very overlooked conditions like autism. So while the impetus to go into autism is more recent, let's say in the last 4 or 5 years, the desire to really help people through a science-based business stems back to the late 1980s. You certainly don't need me to tell you that what you can see on secular television, that the incidence or prevalence of autism in our society is reaching troubling proportions. The CDC, their Centers for Disease Control, used to estimate that autism was about 1 in 1,500 kids. More recently, it was updated to 1 in 500, and then most recently, it was increased to approximately 1 in 110. And why that's troubling, it's even more prevalent in boys. Boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism than girls. And so it's estimated that approximately 1 in 58 boys are affected with autism. In addition, a family's chance of having a second child affected with autism, or a third child affected with autism after having a first, can be 25 to 30 times the risk of the general population. So the incidence is rising, the prevalence is very troubling, so to speak. But in a broader context, even though autism is about 1 in 110 children, or about 1% or 0.9%, developmental delay is about 13% of all kids. And so autism is a form of developmental delay, so our genetic testing and integrated counseling service is really appropriate for kids with general developmental delay as well as autism. And when you look at how many kids, based on the CDC estimates, that's about 533,000 kids per year that should be getting genetic testing for their condition as recommended by the medical organizations. Unfortunately, our statistics indicate that only approximately 50% of children are receiving genetic testing. And so that really opens up the opportunity, if you will, to provide a valuable service to many, many kids, 10 times as many children who should be getting tested who are not currently being tested today. And why that's important from a medical and society perspective, it is a unique opportunity for the company from a marketing perspective to establish a market position, if you will, a first mover advantage with respect to these children who are not currently being tested. Pediatricians are recommended to test for autism through behavioral risk screeners at approximately 18 months of age. However, the current diagnosis is not until 5.5 or 6 years of age. So when you look at really the intended population between 18 months and between 6 years who should be getting tested, that's about 2.4 million kids just within that age range that should be getting genetic testing as recommended or clinically indicated, if you will, by the medical organization. So it's a good opportunity for the company, and it's a great opportunity to really reach kids who are in need. And there's many conditions that are tested prenatally, whether it's cystic fibrosis, whether it's Down syndrome. Obviously, parents have the ability to test prenatally for a particular genetic predisposition, if you will, that might be carried by the parents, by the mom or by the dad. And with respect to autism, while our test is not recommended for the prenatal condition, it's recommended for the postnatal condition, it is really important to inform the parents what their recurrence risk is or what that risk is of having another child affected with the same condition. And I think that really highlights the importance of the genetic factors as it relates to autism. Autism, which is not widely known, while autism does have an environmental component of the disease, autism is primarily genetic in origin. It's estimated that autism is 70 to 80% genetic, whether that's genetic inherited through the parents or whether it happens de novo, that is, genetic variations happen during a child's development, both contribute to the genetic condition. And that's why the genetic counseling at Lineagen is so important, to be able to talk with the parents, to help them understand why this test is important, what it can mean for their family, what it can mean for their family planning, because the more information a family has, a parent has, is just very important with respect to thinking about the future and what the future might hold for their kids. I think my vision for the company is we're a large company in the early years. I think we have a lot of good that we can do. When I look at what we can do over the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to be testing literally tens of thousands of kids. And when you think about this and you think about the ability of our proprietary array that we're launching in partnership with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the University of Utah, we're going to be able to detect genetic variations in more children that's going to result directly into more clinical management changes in more children. And so when I look at over a 3 to 5 year time frame, and the vision of this company is to literally have changed tens of thousands of lives, one test at a time, to provide that family with more information about what might be affecting, what might be causing a particular condition in a child, and really I would love to meet some of the children who received our test early, just to see how that may have changed their lives. In fact, I was very touched by one of our early patients, a patient from Utah actually, that was diagnosed through our test with a syndrome called Angelman syndrome. And the parents were struggling because that child was in speech therapy and was not making progress. But what we were able to identify was by making that genetic diagnosis of Angelman syndrome, which is a form of developmental delay with autism-like symptoms, children with Angelman syndrome rarely ever develop language capabilities. And so they were able to get that child into a sign language program. So they were able to communicate from the parent to the child and child to the parent in ways that they may not have been able to do for years. And so I think that's really what we're in this for, is to really change lives one at a time, but really to affect tens of thousands of kids for the better. Parents of children with developmental delay, including their physicians who treat them, are really on a diagnostic odyssey. Sometimes it can take years to go down this journey. And we believe at Lineagen that we can partner with them not just providing a test. We don't believe that providing a test is the answer. We need to provide a solution. I mean, this is a complex problem. And the solution that we want to bring to bear is to help accelerate the time it takes from a parent who is initially concerned, sometimes at 7 months of age, to help inform the doctor that there could be something objectively that they should measure in a child in order to accelerate or enhance the diagnostic evaluation of that child, and not just a wait and see. We want to break that wait and see kind of cycle that is part of the problem in why the diagnosis is taking so long. We believe that offering this solution through an integrated genetic test, the best genetic testing services possible, with genetic counseling, personalized reporting, and a behavioral screening that the doctors can use at 18 months and 24 months will all work synergistically to really enhance and accelerate that diagnostic evaluation process. And you can't really say that enough, because with autism and developmental delay, time does matter. And we need to capture that time so that child, whatever that clinical management change is that is appropriate for that child in the doctor's view or in the parent's view, we can help them get that management for that child, whether it's early intensive behavioral intervention for a child who might be diagnosed with autism, or other forms of clinical management changes for kids with developmental delay. Time is of the essence. One of the desperate features about autism and developmental delay is there's no societal, socioeconomic boundaries, no ethnic boundaries. It affects everybody equally. Unfortunately, it affects boys 4 times, as I mentioned, 4 times more frequently than girls. And I think there's a lot of unique aspects. There's a lot of unique elements of Lineagen that makes us a unique business with respect to who we're trying to target in terms of community-based pediatrician, trying to serve children who are currently not being served. But I think there are also many unique elements about Lineagen that make us a unique investment opportunity. And I worked with Dr. Patel at V-Spring Capital on the venture side of the table, if you will, and I saw hundreds of companies coming in and pitching their wares. And you realize that certain aspects of Lineagen are very compelling. We've done a lot with a little. We have got on the market, sold a test, we've put a sales force in place, we have hired a full staff, and achieved commercial revenue on less than $11 million in invested equity. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but in the biotechnology industry, $100 million are typically used by companies at our stage. So I think we have a unique profile, a compelling profile for new investors in Lineagen that gives them the opportunity to come in and invest with professional investors such as Sanderling Ventures, V-Spring Capital, Prairie Gold Venture Partners, and Mesa Verde Venture Partners, to sit beside them in partnership to help grow this company, again, from a small company to a big company in its early years, and to really provide significant value to shareholders at the same time we're providing value to our customers, which are really threefold. The patients who need the test, the doctors who order the test, and the insurance companies or the payers who pay for our medical services in today's society. So I think when you look around of all the different companies, Lineagen has both unique aspects from its business perspective as well as its investment perspective. There's no company and no investment that is a non-risk investment. But I firmly believe that Lineagen, what we have done here as a team, has de-risked the investment from a number of different reasons. We've de-risked the science by doing scientifically sound and clinically validated research. We de-risked the market by doing our homework up front to identify who is really the pain point in the marketplace. That's the community-based pediatrician, and not the pediatrician that has the waiting list, if you will, at the academic hospitals, but it's the doctors in the community that need these children to get seen sooner. We de-risk it from the sales side. We know that we can sell this product. We know the service responds really well to promotion. And so from an investment perspective, this is really a growth opportunity. This is an opportunity to expand the sales and marketing franchise, ability to get out and put boots on the ground, sell more tests, sell more services, reach more people in a very rapid fashion. So it provides the opportunity for a number of investors to achieve their means, whatever their means might be, in terms of growth capital. We can scale the organization very rapidly with this growth capital round. And again, invite the investors in to participate in a company, an investment opportunity that's been significantly de-risked by all the work and the capital, the $10 million that have gone into the company, de-risking this opportunity. Lineagen has built a great business today, but we really believe that our sustainable competitive advantage, if you will, resides through intellectual property that's been developed in partnership with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the University of Utah. Namely, we worked exclusively with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to in-license a set of markers that are believed to account for up to 15% of all cases of autism. And we believe this will add significant value for the physician as well as for the parents, in that what is going to give Lineagen the opportunity to do is to be able to identify many more, up to 4 times as many genetic variants that are known to be associated with autism than you could currently get from, let's say, one of Lineagen's competitors today. So we're rapidly moving towards our next generation of our business, which is providing a proprietary assay that will again be integrated with genetic counseling, both pre and post-test genetic counseling, personalized report, all to give the medical community the ability to identify more children who may carry a genetic variation associated with autism or with developmental delay.
My name is Dinesh Patel. I moved to Salt Lake City in 1985 to start a pharmaceutical company. We were focused on the sector called drug delivery. So we developed the transdermal patch. A lot of people are familiar with the nicotine patch. So we developed transdermal patches. And that was in 1985. And I took the company public in 92 and then sold it to Watson Labs in 1999. The time we sold the company, we had revenues of around 50 million. And the products that we developed at Theratech now sell over $500 million annually. So we had a lot of successful products. After selling that, I got into venture capital, and that's investing in early startups. I had done, besides Theratech, I had invested in a lot of startups. So I had gotten into that business, and I thought it might be better to have it organized instead of just personally investing in small, in startup companies. So we started a fund called V-Spring Capital in 1999. And today we manage over $400 million, and we focus on technology and in life sciences. I focus on the life science sector. And the area that I'm really intrigued by and started investing in is in molecular diagnostics. So people talk about personalized medicine, and people think that maybe there'll be drugs developed specifically for you. Well, nobody's ever, no company can ever do that. But by looking at your DNA, looking at your, all your chromosome and genes, one can actually exclude you from drugs that don't work. So it's more of an exclusion criteria, or find out if you are going to have certain diseases. So it's something that can predict, so you can prevent, instead of just trying to cure a disease once it's happened. This is more of a prevention. So I got really interested in molecular diagnostics, and Utah is clearly a place to do that kind of work because, we do have the largest database of genes, medical records, and we've discovered more disease-causing genes here than anywhere else. So the faculty here are in tune with discovering genes. The people here are very much in tune with developing products based on that. So for us, when we look at a company, our number one criteria is the management team. Do we have a team that can deliver? So, we need some experienced people, both as scientists and on the managerial side. So when we look at Lineagen, we found a team that was really solid. So once we find a team that's solid, our next question is, are you addressing an unmet need? And is there a large market opportunity for what you've done? So the company started out with developing tests for autism. And if you've seen the newspapers, every day there's something being reported about autism. And suddenly you find that autism has become quite prevalent. And in my opinion is that it's not that suddenly kids developed autism, but I believe with better testing, we're now identifying children who maybe 15, 20 years ago might have been said, crazy kid, put him in a corner. Instead of that, now we can test the child, we can find what kind of learning or development disability the child has, and then treat the child. So we see that this as a huge opportunity. So Lineagen meets two, the first criteria, solid management. 2, unmet need. 3, it's a very large market. I mean, there's a huge market opportunity. So for us, when you have all these 3, we said we should invest. So that's how we got involved with Lineagen, and we've been extremely pleased with the way the company has progressed. The company already is marketing products. It's developing the next line of products in autism, and they're also going to develop other tests for children. And so we're very excited about our investment and our involvement with Lineagen. So obviously, whenever we invest, there is the money angle, but we also are always interested in improving the lives of people involved. When you look at autism, a family that has an autistic child, their life is totally turned upside down. I mean, even if they can just have a child that can be normal, and whatever that normal means, for half a day, it makes a huge impact for them. And with this diagnostic test, and if you give them behavioral therapy, children actually turn out to be functional and independent. So it's a huge, huge societal impact. And for us, whenever you can do that in addition to generating revenue is always a big plus. And so if we were just looking for money, we would not be investing in these kind of companies. When we looked at Lineagen as an investment, at that time, Dr. Steve Prescott and Michael Paul, they were the key kind of leaders here. And both of them Steve Prescott as a physician, his reputation is so, he's so well known in the work that he's done in genetics. And Michael Paul comes from the business side and from the science side. He was a business development person at NPS Pharmaceutical, a local company. And I had worked with him over the years. And in fact, at our venture fund, he was working with me as a venture partner. So I really know him well, and I know his capabilities. So that, to me, was a major influencing factor besides the market. Like I said, the number one factor that we look at is the management team. And then when we added Bert, I mean, he comes from the marketing side, which none of us here had. And he was at a company which he built, when he was there, they went from a small company to a several $100 million sales company. So he brought in one of the key ingredients that was missing in the team. So when you start rounding up the team, then Galen came in. He's more of a manager who can, you have to have somebody that looks after the whole operation. There's so many things happening. So you need somebody that can tie everything together. So Galen fills up that role. So to me, the key positions are filled up with people that are extremely, extremely capable. And we feel that, if A doesn't work, they'll make B work because, these are smart people who know what they're doing. So Lineagen has a very bright future ahead. I mean, just if you look at the test for autism, because it's such a spectrum. There are so many different diseases that are under that umbrella. Just to try and identify those various diseases is a huge opportunity. And then there are so many other children's diseases that nobody else has really paid any attention to. So I think this company has a potential to be huge on its own. And I would not be surprised if we have 2 or 3 more tests that this company could go public. And again, continue to develop more products that will help children. Now, this is a great opportunity for somebody who's looking to invest in a company that not only is going to do well financially, but that helps the children, helps the parents, helps the community. Lineagen is the company.